Across the wires and through the air, those who seek will find me there. Story, wonder, voice, and art, find the ears and find the heart.
Hello, my dear listener. It's me, Wish Amaya, coming to tell you that for the next 2 weeks, Wishcrafting is going to be on a brief hiatus. So this week and next week, I'll be playing a couple of my favorite episodes from further back in the catalog. I know I've had an influx of new listeners. Hello, new listeners. I'm so glad you're here. And I just wanted to reshare these pieces of my work that I'm really proud of while I am taking the time that I need during this pop of summer activity. So in 2 weeks, I will be back with a brand new episode for you. But in the meantime, please enjoy this rerun of one episode that I think that you will enjoy, whether you've heard it before or not. And I will see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, don't forget to keep your roots deep and your dreams wild.
Storytelling. It's the unseen thread woven deep into the bones of each and every one of us. The stories we're told as children shape how we walk through the world, the narratives by which the fabric of reality is understood. And eventually, the stories that we're raised on shape how we view our own story, for better or for worse. It's not surprising for 1 second that the moon, a constant light to us all, appears over and over again in stories everywhere. The earliest story of the moon that I remember being told came in a book, Goodnight Moon. This classic, called in more than a few resources as, quote, one of the most beloved books of all time, end quote, is one that lives in the memories of the masses. My Nana read me this story often, and I began learning to read from this very book due to the repetition of reading it so many times. I still have fond memories of playing outside, making nature potions until dark, and saying goodnight to Luna in the sky before making my way inside, and then when the lights went out before bed, I would say goodnight, house, just like the little bunny, because of that book. I still say goodnight to the moon and to my house every day. It is a practice that evolved over time, and now I talk to my house, and the moon for that matter, like they are old friends, because they are. From a pagan perspective, little me was getting something imprinted into her teeny little brain. It was an idea that we can be in relationship to the world around us versus having a fully singular experience. This is just one of the stories about the moon that has impacted the course of my life, but there are so many others. Something so big, constant, and alluring as the moon, has an impressive catalog of adventures, heartbreaks, and warnings to choose from. While I was trying to recall the earliest moon story that was told to me without the aid of a book or film, eventually I landed on a story that was really a memory of a neighborhood boy that had once told me that he'd heard the moon was made of cheese. Oh, yes, that's right. Cheese. Listener, this probably doesn't surprise you. You saw the episode title. But I bet somewhere in the recesses of your memory, you also know of a time that the moon was perhaps made of cheese. This is the kind of folklore I love, not just because I love cheese, but because when I think to myself, the moon is made of cheese, it conjures in me a nostalgia, not simply for warm summer nights on bicycles, playing manhunt, and eating popsicles. No, it goes much further than that, to a bittersweet longing for a past that I have not lived, but somehow know intimately. I get these images in my head of mice in boots and banjos and farmhouse animals playing together and playing music. I get warm lighting. I get a faintly sweet scent rolling in on a warm breeze. I see it all. I feel it all when I think of this moon being made of cheese statement. But what struck me was why? Why does my head fill with the feeling of staring up at a clear, starry sky, moon full and luminous? Around me, an expanse of dark countryside lit by the radiant light of the huge round moon that demands my attention. I'm wearing something flowy, the wind is in my hair, my clothes are blowing around me in the warm breeze. It really, truly evokes this feeling from deep in my core. And when I think the moon is made of cheese, I am just instantly pulled both elsewhere and inward all at once. My imagination is going, and it's in warm places that really call to a time that I have not existed in a life I have not existed in. It's an expansive energy that feels full of possibility that could lead to mischief or nothing at all. This feeling, for me, strikes a particular vein of curiosity, one that I love to explore. So I chased a fox, and I fell headfirst into a world where the moon is made of cheese. Green cheese, probably, and you're coming with me today. No digestive enzymes needed, just a small jump into this well over here. Oh, don't be afraid. You're gonna love it, I promise. Are you ready? Great. On the count of 3, we jump, okay? I know it's dark down there. Don't worry, you'll be fine. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Unfortunately, there is no real historical belief that the moon was made of cheese. In fact, many before me have tried to pinpoint precisely how and why we have all heard this at one point or another, seemingly to no avail. Around the time of the moon landing in 1969, there was a resurgence of moon cheese poems, stories, general rhetoric, articles, even scientific publications asking scientists what they thought about the moon being made of cheese. One Berkeley professor commented that he thought it was more likely to be made of cotton candy than cheese. Yeah, okay. He'd obviously not done his research because since the 16th century it was pretty well established that if the moon was made of cheese, it was a green cheese, to be sure. Ew, wish, that's gross and weird. Why green? Why wouldn't it be like white or yellow? If it's green, doesn't that mean it's like moldy or something? Well, if that's what you're thinking right now, listener, I can understand why. But, that's not exactly true. You see, the idea was that if a cheese was called green, at least in the 16th century, that is because it was a new and fresh cheese that hadn't been fully refined. It hadn't had the whey pushed all the way out of it. Think like a queso fresca or something like that. White, round, moist, mottled with pits. This is an important detail to this folk belief because in the 16th century, which would be the 1500s, this green cheese was actually used as an insult, and I'll explain what I mean. At this point in time, it would have been common knowledge that green cheese meant new, unaged cheese. So, when the writer, Sir Thomas More, gave us what is probably the earliest use of this insult, it exploded, and writers wrote and rewrote this into the ground. You might be thinking, I still don't understand where the insult is coming from. Well, let me share it with you. It went a little something like, wow, that person is so dumb, they'd believe that the moon is made of a green cheese. Meaning you could convince them of anything. It was a clever way of calling somebody very dull-witted or gullible. But where did Sir Thomas More pull this from? Was he divinely inspired? Well, perhaps. There was no time period in history, like I mentioned before, where humanity collectively engaged in the unanimous whimsical notion that the moon was actually made of cheese, of any color. But the moon being made of cheese was a well-known fable at this point in time, which is probably where Sir Thomas More pulled it from and was just the first person to actually write it down. Let's define quickly what a fable is before we move forward. A fable is defined as a short story, often with animals as the characters, and used to relay some kind of message of morality or truth to the listener. Sir Thomas More may have been the first earliest written version of the moon cheese insult, but by the time he wrote it down, many cultures already had some version of this fable regarding the moon being made of cheese, and they all went a little something like this. A simpleton sees a reflection of the moon in water of some kind, and without questioning what they're seeing, springs into action only to end up with the consequences of varying severity. For instance, in Turkey, a man goes to get water from a well in the evening and sees the reflection of the moon in the well. He rushes to get the bucket and rope down to scoop out the moon, and in the frenzy falls backwards and sees that the moon is, in fact, still enthroned in the heavens. In Scotland, a wolf, or sometimes a fox, sees the reflection of the moon in a pool and spends hours fishing for it, only to wait so long that he falls asleep and directly into the pool. Hungry and soaked through and staring up at the moon from his back now, he realizes he's scared away all the actual fish and will go hungry tonight for his mistake. In provincial France, a farmer is giving his donkey water from a spring where he sees the reflection of the moon. A cloud passes over the moon and the farmer thinks that the donkey has drank it down and kills it to save her, only to have the cloud pass over and realize the terrible mistake he's made. One might say that France and fables go together like baguettes and butter. Their history is almost inextricable from one another. France has a very old folkloric beast fable tradition that began as an oral tradition and didn't see its stories written down until the medieval period. We can't really be sure when exactly these folk tales or beast fables began, but by the year of 1100 AD, there was a well-established understanding of the symbolism of what the different animals in the fables represented. This meant that when someone sat down to tell you the story of the lion and the bear, you knew this story was going to be, at its core, one of ego versus strength. You probably intuitively know which animal represents which. Many people, then and now, know of Aesop's fables, but perhaps don't know much more than them being a collection of stories often told to children. Aesop was a Greek slave who was purportedly gifted at storytelling. All of his stories were passed down in the oral tradition, with his fables unrecorded until some 3 centuries after his death. 3 centuries is a long time, and by that point there were a vast variety of folkloric tales, jokes, and phrases from far outside the Greek world sphere. Remember how I said that fables usually have animals as the characters? That is because Aesop's fables solidified the common understanding of so many of the popular folkloric motifs that we still have today, but especially the animal characters and their allegorical representations. You probably know these representations yourself. Lions, majestic and powerful, representing royalty, ego, power. Snakes, who shed their skin, represent transformation and immortality. If you've ever experienced a goose in real life, you will probably understand how and why they represented hard-headed foolishness. Stags represent majesty and sacrifice. Owls are the pillars of wisdom. The wolf is a fiend looming just outside your field of vision. However, with a vast amount of time during Aesop's death and the recording of his fables, a whole 3 centuries, remember, along with the spread of Christianity, some of these common representations changed. The owl, once sacred and associated with many goddess wisdom traditions, became representative of death and illness. The snake turned from a psychopomp leading alchemists and healers through the hierarchy of realms into temptation, sin, or even the devil himself. Similarly, the wolf, previously used to warn of danger, now represented the personification of evil itself. However, there is one creature who kept the same reputation through time. One clever of wit, cunning, and with a propensity to get in and out of sticky situations. You probably know just whom I speak of. The slinky, svelte, and sly fox. A naturally solitary animal that doesn't rely on a pack or brute force remains recognized for its natural attributes even today. Choose any culture globally, and there you find the fox. Undoubtedly, you will find stories of its trickery, cleverness, and wit that transcend time and space. While human civilizations grew, the wild creatures were made more of exactly that, wild. However, the clever fox easily slipped into the shadows and found a cultural staying power that was nearly unmatched. An unattended chicken here, a bone from the garbage heap. Foxes are opportunists. While larger predators became dangers, increasingly further and further outside of civilization, the fox slipped into the shadows and stayed a present, albeit sometimes annoying, presence in the everyday lives of an ever-growing humanity. Perhaps this is why, in the High Middle Ages, when society experienced a renaissance of the beast fable tradition, the fox managed to continue its already well-established legacy, and the other creatures of tales old and new remained firmly over the hedge. The renaissance of the beast fable tradition began around 1000 AD, during a time when, at that point, Christianity was well established in the world. Just like the algorithm does to us today, it was common for clergymen to use whatever was trendy in the time period and integrate it into their conversion propaganda. There's even a word for this method. It's called homiletics. Medieval audiences of all ages and station were taken by the chivalry and power games of the Greco-Roman fables that were lodged into the public consciousness once again. And it's here, around 1000 AD, that we start to see the classic elements and characters make their entrances into the written record. Everything before then had been traditionally orally told. Nothing was written down. It was just told person to person, like me and you are right now. Poet or clergyman, entertainment or propaganda, fables were back in style, baby. Christianity may have come in to tweak the classic fables that were known and loved, but sometimes the power of a story is so big that it slips through the cracks of consciousness and stays there, like concrete, forming a cornerstone, a base to a common understanding of things. These cornerstones are the stories that linger through time and space because they touch on a piece of our humanity that is timelessly understood by all, regardless of the angle from which it's told. The story with the most staying power is, of course, the battle of strength versus cunning. This story goes beyond Europe, beyond culture, beyond time, to the very beginning of everything. It is indeed a timeless tale that has been told nearly every way it could be. But during the High Middle Ages and beyond, this story found its most popular iteration told through that of the wolf and the fox. The earliest recording of the French folkloric motif of the wolf and the fox was by a French Jewish rabbi known as Rashi about 1024 years ago, and it goes like this. Quote, "A fox once craftily induced a wolf to go and join the Jews in their Sabbath preparations and share in their festivities. On his appearing in their midst, the Jews fell upon him with sticks and beat him. He therefore came back determined to kill the fox, but the latter pleaded, 'It's no fault of mine that you were beaten. They have a grudge against your father, who once helped them in preparing their banquet and then consumed all of the choice bits.' 'And I was beaten for the wrong done by my father?' cried the indignant wolf. 'Yes,' said the fox. 'The fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. However,' he continued, 'come with me, and I will supply you with an abundance of food.' And so he led him to a well which had a beam across it from either end, of which hung a rope with a bucket attached. The fox entered the upper bucket and descended into the well, whilst the lower one was drawn up. 'Where are you going?' asked the wolf. The fox, pointing to the cheese-like reflection of the moon, replied, 'Here is plenty of meat and cheese. Get into the other bucket and come down at once.' The wolf did so, and as he descended, the fox was drawn up. 'And how am I to get out?' demanded the wolf. 'Ah,' said the fox, 'the righteous is delivered out of trouble, and the wicked cometh in his stead.'" End quote. So, in case you missed it, the fox is trying to get the wolf off of his back, so he sends him to the humans. The humans beat him up, but he survives. So in round 2, the fox says, "Oh, I'm sorry you didn't get your meal, but I know how to fix this," and convinces him that there is a store of meat and cheese at the bottom of the well by showing him the moon's reflection in the well and convincing him that the reflection is a wheel of cheese. And thus, a written record of 2 very recurring folkloric motifs are born: the motifs of the moon being made of cheese and the never-ending rivalry of the wolf and the fox. By the time Rashi wrote down his version of the moon being made of cheese, or the wolf and the fox, these motifs were well established in the oral storytelling traditions of early medieval France. His version of the story is most likely the closest written version to the original, which is probably why it became so popular. It was an absolute hit, made obvious by the fact that soon after Rashi immortalized it into writing, many others, monks and poets, all had a go of writing their own version of the beloved folktale. Many kept the elements the same, but eventually, as all stories do, something changed. Now, quickly, I want to say and clarify that while Rashi was the first one to write down the motif of the moon being made of cheese, along with the wolf and the fox, the Sir Thomas More that I mentioned earlier was the first to write it as an insult, just to clarify that. After Rashi wrote his timeless story down, a poet named Alfonsi wrote his own version of The Wolf and the Fox, in what would be the first version of the story that ever got translated into English. However, in Alfonsi's version, the bottom of the well holds the promise of paradise instead of a large glowing wheel of cheese. Maybe right now you're thinking to yourself, why did the much more cliché and much less interesting version go big and get translated into English when the highly understandable and whimsical version of the moon being made of cheese not? And listener, you wouldn't be alone. I ask myself the same question, and I think the answer is a simple one. People love a good trickster. And though Alfonsi may have been sipping more of the Christianity Kool-Aid than the other poets, perhaps he had a knack for medieval marketing, because unlike the other stories flooding the minds of the people at the time, the fox in his story had a name. Now, I promise we'll get back to the moon being made of cheese, but if you'll humor me a moment, I think I've spotted another rabbit just up ahead and I'd like to chase him. Come quickly, we've got to jump down one more hole, okay? Are you ready? All right, let's go on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. There were many people telling many stories with very similar motifs and narratives at this time. And before Alfonsi's version got translated into English, we had a poet named Novartis. Novartis was pretty revolutionary because he decided to take many of the classical beast fables that were known and loved and put them into one volume of stories. Now, that doesn't seem too groundbreaking so far, except that gone were the settings of ancient Greece, the wild forests and faraway towns. Novartis decided to place all of these tales into a noticeably medieval setting, one that the people would recognize. He seemed to understand the power of recognition, because he was the very first author to take all of the common characters of the fables and turn them into a recurring cast. He was the first to name them all. With this, what may have just been another compendium of fables turned into a mock epic with a full cast that the people could love, hate, or as you'll soon see, both at once. This mock epic that Novartis wrote is called the Isengrimus, and it featured the wolf, Isengrim, at the center of it all, with a whole world of anthropomorphic beasts and humans coexisting through Isengrim's scheming. Time is a friend to few, and a double-edged sword to most. To the wolf, however, it may be safe to say that time was certainly a foe. Novartis' story of Isengrim the wolf lasted 2 decades in popularity, and at the end of that time, the wolf was solidified as an evil, self-serving figure. The wolf, Isengrim, was a villain whose name served as a warning in any and every household. Isengrim became the standard wolf, and through the signs of the times, came to represent the corrupt and oppressive church and authority figures of the time. Folks began to favor the cunning and witty adversary of Isengrim, Reynard the fox. Reynard and Isengrim were well-known characters in the oral traditions of the region, and I'd like to note here that Novartis took their names from the oral stories that were being told by the common folk. These stories were so popular that many a creative tried to cash in on that popularity. And eventually, another poet, Pierre St. Cloud, rewrote his version of this widely popular beast fable epic. Except this time, the fox was the main protagonist. He must have also had a great marketing team or methodology because this was the right move. St. Cloud's retelling was called Les Romans de Reynard, or The Cycle of Reynard, and it became the most popular folkloric cycle of stories in the region, even through today. The Cycle of Reynard follows an anthropomorphic fox, Reynard, as he gets up to all kinds of shenanigans that are shamelessly selfish. In his world full of anthropomorphic animals that live aside humans, Reynard is always either trying to get some kind of advantage for himself, or he is avoiding retaliation for his aforementioned shenanigans. When it comes to morals and values, Reynard isn't gray, he's black. He's willing to lie, cheat, steal, and at times resort to violence to achieve his ends. Isn't it strange, then, that we find such a character at the center of one of the most popular group of fables in time, but particularly in a very Christian medieval Europe? Like I said earlier, people love a trickster. We love a trickster. Tricksters are allowed to ride the liminal. They can lean into the lewd and the absurd, all while offering us a cheeky hand into the fray. Tricksters are on their own time, truly. Their path is set with or without you. I think that's part of the reason why they're so fun to enjoy. And Reynard is no different. In the harsh world of the medieval period, and yes, it was harsh and gross, Reynard and his stories provided much-needed comedic relief to a common folk who saw the rich getting richer and the poor suffering more and more so that they could do so. Sounds achingly familiar, yeah? I recommend reading Reynard's epic in whichever way you can, not just because it's a relatable parody of human nature from 1,000 years ago, but because it's a fun read. However, when it comes to Reynard's stories, there are a ton of them, and you're listening to me right now, so I'm going to give you a little example of how Reynard exemplified and allowed some relief to the harsh realities of the world. In one story, Reynard is called to the court of the sick king, who is a lion. The lion orders the fox, known for his cunning mind, to find him a cure now. He's not very kind in his demands and threatens Reynard's life if he fails. So, what proceeds to happen, instead of actually trying to help the king, Reynard finds ways to advance his own ambitions. One by one, he calls the subjects of the king's court and recommends treatments that both disadvantage and humiliate those of the royal court who have wronged or unsettled scores with Reynard, often humiliating the king and people of his court in the process. During all of this, Reynard is taking bits of this or bits of that from the palace, subtly settling his own score with the king. This is a really early version of sticking it to the man circa 1180. While Reynard probably did try and convince the wolf at least once that the moon was made of cheese, we don't have that much of a written record of Reynard specifically doing so. We do, however, have a pretty similar story where Isengrim the wolf is lured into the cheese and wine cellar by Reynard, only to be locked inside so that Reynard can have a very spicy tryst with Isengrim's wife. And when he is called to court later to answer for his crime of having a spicy tryst with another person's wife, Badger, who is Reynard's lawyer, an anthropomorphic badger, quickly pipes up and asks, "But, Isengrim, were you not satisfied? And your wife satisfied alike? Which was alluding to the wolf eating all of the cheese and drinking all of the wine in the cellar, as well as the wolf's wife finding pleasure in equal measure with her encounter with the clever fox, Reynard. And I think I love that story just as much as I love the moon being made of cheese. 200 years after his stories went into the written record, Reynard's antics were being shared across the continent of Europe in many different languages. However, 200 years is a long time, during which Europe saw the Catholic Church become a more centralized power. And with that, of course, we saw holy wars, plague, and Reformation, often which did not favor the common folk. The wheel keeps turning, and change is something that no one escapes, not even the immortalized Reynard. Reynard's legacy up until this point had constantly painted him as a lovable but undeniable villain. However, with the unrest and injustice of the common peasant folk experience in the 1300s now, Reynard's retellings began to find him more often than not in direct opposition to the powers that be. Reynard slowly became more and more of a voice to the common people, until finally in this era we see him make a very stark transformation from shifty trickster into agent provocateur. This era begins a long cycle of Reynard's stories where he becomes a folk hero, an agent of vice that constantly opposes any and all authority, a finalized image that would last 1,000 years up until the present day. He did lose a little bit of momentum and popularity finally after 1,000 years, literally 1,000 years, when a group of dickwads you might know as the Nazi Party tried to appropriate Reynard for their purposes. He does still, however, live on after that. He has been referenced and featured in various forms of media, from comics to TV series. I most recently read a book, a romance novel, which was very spicy and lovely, that featured Reynard as the male protagonist. It was a standalone novel, absolutely deliciously written and full of adventure, action, and just enough magic. It was everything I wanted from a modern Reynard story, actually, and that author went to write a 3-part series with Reynard as the male antagonist, and it's full of witches, pagan lore, shapeshifter magic, and it's really well written. I will leave those books in the description if you are interested. Reynard also made an appearance in the very popular TV show The Magicians, and I won't give too much away, but they were definitely referencing the much older versions of Reynard in that series. Even a little company that you might know as Disney once considered turning the cycle of Reynard into one of their movies, but eventually it was scrapped because the subversive nature of Reynard didn't fit in with the family values of Disney. However, the character designs by studio designer Ken Anderson would eventually become what is well known and loved today as the movie Robin Hood, with the fox as Robin Hood, the king as the lion, and the sheriff as a Ysengrim-style wolf. Robin Hood was one of my favorites as a kid, and I can't help but wonder how its overt themes of resistance to a corrupt authority shaped who I am today. There are no shortages of trickster fox characters to choose from in stories modern and old across the globe, and each and every one of them can, with a knowing eye, find influence from the OG trickster fox Reynard. These days, Reynard has fallen into the shadows of the public eye, much like real-world foxes, fleeting in the moments we share with them. But this is probably just how the trickster likes it. Just on the edge of perception, ready at the precisely perfect moment to beckon you into the lesson he has been teaching humanity this whole time, that the only thing we can truly count on in this world is change. 1,000 years ago, it was a golden crown. Today, a suit and tie, the face of power, will always change. Reynard offers you a hand into the shadow to learn that the real power lies in a subtle truth, that if the tides of change are destined to come, it is in your best interest to make friends with the wind. So, listener, the next time somebody tries to tell you that the moon is made of cheese, you can confidently look at them and say, absolutely it is. In fact, it is made of the finest green cheese you will find in all the world. And while their modern minds ponder why exactly the moon is made of cheese and why it's green, you can turn and, like the sly fox, dash once more into the shadows. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Wishcrafting. I put my heart and soul into this research. It took me a very, very, very long time. So if you made it to the end, thank you so much for listening to it all. I know it wasn't perfect, but sometimes you just have to do it anyways. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. And again, hello to our listeners that are across the oceans. I'm so happy to have you here. I think our next episode is going to be a little different and just do something a little bit more informal, let you get to know me a little bit, and make some very fun announcements. So I look forward to that. I hope you are having a wonderful full moon day, and may all your full moon illuminations and manifestations come to you swiftly and with all of the luck, warmth, and ease that you need at this time. Thank you so much, and until next time, warm wishes and many blessings to you.